Good morning. Page 406. Chapter 5. End of sentence. In 8 years of prison and prison camp, I have never heard anyone who had experienced exile say a good word about it. But from his first days in jail, under investigation and in transit, simply because of 6 flat stone surfaces of a cell pressing on him too closely, the dream of exile burns like a secret light in the prisoner's mind, a flickering, iridescent mirage, and the wasted breaths of prisoners on their dark bunks heave in sighs of longing. If only they would sentence me to exile. I did not escape the common lot. Far from it. The dream of exile had me more powerfully than most in its grip. At the Jerusalem clay pit, I listened to the cocks crowing in the village nearby and dreamed of exile. From the roof of the checkpoint on the Kaluga Road, I looked at the unbroken mass of the alien capital and silently begged, let me get as far from it as possible, to some out-of-the-way place of exile. I even sent a naive appeal to the Supreme Soviet for commutation of my 8 years, for commutation of my 8 years in the camp to exile for life, in however remote and wild a place. The elephant did not even sneeze in reply. I had not yet realized that lifelong exile would always be waiting for me, but that it would come after, not instead of the camp. In 1952, a dozen prisoners were released from the 3,000-strong Russian camp division at Akapatsus. It looked very strange at the time. 58s let out through the gates. Akapatsus had been in existence for 3 years by then, and not a single man had been released, nor had anyone reached the end of his sentence. Evidently, for the few who had lived to see the day, the first wartime tenors had just ended. We impatiently awaited letters from them. A few came, directly or indirectly, and we learned that nearly all of them had been taken from the camp to places of exile, although their sentences had not included exile. But this surprised no one. It was clear to our jailers and to us that justice, length of sentence, formal documentation had nothing to do with it. The point was that once we had been declared enemies, the state would ever after assert the right of the stronger to trample us, and trample us, crush us, squash us, until the day we died. And we were so used to it, it had become so much part of us, that no other state of affairs would have seemed normal, either to the regime or to us. In Stalin's last years, it was not the fate of the exiles that caused alarm, but that of the nominally liberated, those who to all appearances were now safely beyond the gates, and unguarded, those from which the tutelary grey wing of the MBD had apparently been withdrawn. Exile, which the powers that be obtusely regarded as an additional punishment, was a prolongation of the prisoner's irresponsible existence, the fatalistic routine in which he feels so secure. Exile relieved us of the need to choose a place of residence for ourselves, and so from troublesome uncertainties and errors. No place would have been right, except that to which they had sent us. This was the one and only place in the whole Soviet Union where no one could reproach us as intruders. Only there had we been assured an undeniable right to 3 square arshins of land. Only there had we an assured and undeniable right to 3 square arshins of land. And if, like me, you were alone in the world when you left the camp, with no one anywhere waiting for you, exile was perhaps the only place where you could hope to meet a kindred spirit. Our masters are quick enough to arrest people, but less quick to release them. If some democratic Greek or socialist Turk had been kept in jail a single day longer than he should have been, the world press would have choked with indignation. I was happy enough to be held only a few days too long, and then released. No, after that I was in transit under guard, and they kept me on the road another month in what was now my own time. Nonetheless, as we left the camp under guard, we were still careful to respect the final prison superstitions. On no account must you look back at your prison, or else you will return, and you must do the right thing with your spoon. What was the right thing, though? Some said take it with you. Or you would return for it. Others said fling it at the prison, or else the prison would pursue you. I had molded my spoon myself in the foundry, and I took it with me. Transit prisons flashed by again: Pavlodar, Omsk, Novosibirsk. Although our sentences had expired, they searched us, took prohibited articles from us, herded us into cramped, overcrowded cells, prison vans, stole-up-in wagons, mixed us up with the criminals. The guard dogs growled at us. As of old, the lads with the automatic rifles yelled, "Eyes front," all just as before. Then, at the Omsk transit prison, a good-natured warder called out our names from our dossier and asked the 5 of us from a Kabath suit, "Which god have you got working for you? Why, where are you going?" We are all ears. Obviously, it was somewhere nice, wide to the south. The warder marveling at it. From Novosibirsk, we were in fact diverted southward. We were going where it was warm, where there was rice, where there were grapes and apples. What could it mean? Surely somewhere in the Soviet Union, Comrade Beria could find us a worse place. Could exile really be like this? I already had plans, which I kept to myself, to write a cycle of poems and call it Lines of the Beauties of Exile. At Djambal station, we were transferred from the stole-up-in car with the usual harsh treatment, taken through a living corridor of escort troops to a lorry, and made to sit on the bare floor of the vehicles, as though now that we had served our time, we might be tempted to run away. It was the dead of night, and only the waning moon dimly illuminated the dark avenue along which we were being carried. But there was light enough for us to see that it really was an avenue of Lombardy poplars. So this was exile. We might almost be in the Crimea. It was the end of February, and on the Irtish, where we had come from, it was cruelly cold, but here a spring breeze caressed us. They took us to jail, and the jail admitted us without the usual body search and bath. The accursed walls were losing some of their harshness. In the morning, the block superintendent unlocked the door and said, almost in a whisper, "Come out and bring all your belongings." The devil was unclenching his claws. We stepped out into the arms of a red spring morning. The dawn light was warming the brick walls of the jail. A lorry was waiting for us in the middle of the yard with two Zeks who were joining our party and already sitting in the back. This was the time to breathe deeply, to look around, to steep ourselves in the uniqueness of that moment. But we simply could not waste a chance to strike up an acquaintance. One of our new companions, a skinny, gray-haired man with pale, watery eyes, was sitting on his crumpled belongings, as upright, as majestic as a star about to give an audience to ambassadors. You might have thought that he was deaf or a foreigner, with no hope that we should find a common language. As soon as I was up on the lorry, I decided to get into conversation with him, and he introduced himself in pure Russian, in a voice with no hint of a quaver in it. "I'm Vladimir Alexandrovich Vasilyev," and a spark of sympathy jumped between us. The heart senses who is a friend and who is no friend. This was a friend. In prison, you must find out about people quickly. For all you know, you will be separated in a minute's time. No, of course, we were no longer in prison, but still, shouting above the noise of the engine, I interviewed him, and I did not notice that the lorry had moved from the asphalted prison yard onto the cobbled street. Forgot that I must not look back at my last jail. How many last jails would there yet be? Did not even spare a glance for a bit of the outside world which we were traveling, and soon we were back in the broader inner yard of a provincial MBD post, and once again we were forbidden to leave it for the town. For the first minute, you might have taken Vladimir Alexandrovich for a man of 90. His eyes looked that beyond his time. His eyes that looked beyond time. His gaunt features, his lock of white hair, all told the same story. He was, in fact, 73. He turned out to be one of the oldest surviving Russian engineers, one of our outstanding hydrotechnicians and hydrographers. Try and say that out loud. It's strange. Hydrographers. In the Union of Russian Engineers. What was that? I had never heard of it before. It was a high-powered public body created by the technical intelligentsia, one of those 100-year leaps into the future, perhaps of which Russia made several in the first 2 decades of the century, but all of which miscarried. Vasilyev had been a prominent member, and he still recalled with a solid satisfaction how we refused to pretend the dates can be grown on dry sticks, which of course was why they were disbanded. Half a century back, he had covered on foot or on horseback every inch of the Semirishia region in which we had now arrived. Long ago, before the First World War, we had drawn up plans for flooding the Chuisk Valley, for the Narayan Cascade, and for boring a tunnel through the Chu-Ili Mountains. And still, before the First World War, had begun carrying them out himself. He had sent abroad for 6 electric excavators and put them to work in that part of the world as early as 1912. All 6 survived the revolution and were passed off as a new Soviet invention at the Ch05 in the 30s. After serving a sentence of 15 years for sabotage, the last 3 of the Verkhnya Uralsk isolator, he had obtained a special act of indulgence, permission to spend his exile and die right there in Semirasia, where he had begun his career. Even this favor would never have been granted if Beria had not remembered him from the 20s, when engineer Vasilyev had divided the waters of the Caucasus between its 3 republics. And that was why he was now sitting, sphinx-like, absorbed in his thoughts, on a sack in the back of a lorry. For him it was not just his first day of freedom, but his homecoming to the land of his youth, the land of his inspiration. No human life is so short as all that if you leave memorial trails along the way. Not so long ago, VA's daughter had stopped at a newspaper window on the Arbat in Moscow and to look at Trude. The Arbat is the artistic kind of core in the downtown. A devil-may-care correspondent was lavishing well-paid words on a rousing account of its journey through the Chuisk Valley, which had been irrigated and brought to life by creative Bolsheviks, with descriptions of their Narian Cascade, the ingenious hydrotechnical installations, and happy collective farmers. And suddenly, who can have whispered in his ear? He ended with this: but very few people know that all these transformations are the realization of the dream of the talented Russian engineer Vasilyev, who found no support in old bureaucratic Russia. How sad that the young enthusiast did not live up to see the triumph of his noble ideas. The precious lines in the newspaper blurred, swam. Vasilyev's daughter tore the newspaper out of its case, pressed it to her breast, and carried it off, with a militiaman blowing his whistle after her. While this was going on, the young enthusiast was sitting in a damp cell in the Verkhnya Uralsk isolator. Rheumatism or some sort of bone disease had bent the old man double, and he could no longer straighten his spine. Luckily, he was not alone in the cell, but shared it with some Swede or other who had cured his spinal trouble by massage. Wow, can you imagine? Swedes are not very often found in Soviet jails. I remembered that I too had been in with one of them. His name was Eric Arvid Anderson. V.A. eagerly interrupted. He was very quick in his speech and movements. Of course it had to be. It was Arvid who had massaged him back to health. A reminder from the archipelago, by way of farewell, that it's a small world after all. So that was where they had taken Arvid 3 years ago, to the Uralsk isolation prison, and somehow or other, neither NATO nor his multi-millionaire papa had made much of an effort to save the dear lad. Meanwhile, they had called us into the Oblast command post, which was right there on the MVD yard, and consisted of a colonel, a major, and several lieutenants who were in charge of all exiles in Dujambul Oblast. We, however, had no access to the colonel, while the major only scanned our faces as though they were newspaper headlines, and it was the lieutenants who exercised their beautiful penmanship on the task of processing us. I'm sorry, I have to end there, because this snowed last night and the snowblower is out. I'm sure you can hear him. So, thank you for listening. Have a great day.